that, I'm happy to talk about why we're here and the purpose of this series. Over this last year, we've all been going through a whole lot. Communities, community serving organizations, we've been hit really hard. And if I were a betting man, which I am not, I would wager that every single person on this call has been affected directly by the evolving federal landscape, whether that's professionally or personally. We've lost funding, we've lost programs, we've lost critical policies and protections that enable our work on behalf of community. And to make up for it, all of us are working harder. We're working longer hours, we're taking on more responsibilities, we're figuring out how to execute programs with less funding, with less staff. We're also having to work smarter, having to build coalitions, strengthen our relationships, and really focus on why our work matters. Whether we're talking about environmental justice, transportation, economic justice, or all the important issues that we work on, our work directly impacts families and communities. And so this evolving landscape is really timely, generates a really timely and urgent need for us to take a step back, evaluate and assess sort of where we are, and to figure out a path forward. And so the purpose of this series, we would like to inform participants on federal policy changes impacting nonprofits and services. We want to share how these changes are affecting communities with local examples. We want to showcase how organizations are adapting and responding in creative ways. We want to foster open dialogue and collective resilience. And finally, lay the groundwork for ongoing cross-sector regional collaboration. By the end of this three-part webinar series, it is our hope that you will leave with a clear picture of what has changed at the federal level and why it matters, to connect those shifts to real-world implications for funding, programs, and services, and then to walk away with practical next steps on who to work with and what to work with them on. So with that, I would love to turn it over to Joanna to hear from how Resident Energy is responding to the moment.
Awesome. Thank you, Tristan. Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. I'm so happy you're here with us today. My name is Joanna DeCunha, and I'm the Environmental Justice Program Manager at Resident Energy. We are a solar developer based in Boston and 100% employee-owned. Our work focuses on expanding access to clean energy for underinvested communities across Mass. And with a growing footprint in New York and Connecticut, we support nonprofits, multifamily affordable housing providers, helping them go solar and access funding and financing opportunities that can otherwise be difficult to navigate. My background over the past decade has been in the nonprofit and higher education sectors, and now I'm in the clean energy space. And in my role, I build partnerships with nonprofits, exploring solar solutions, and lead education and outreach efforts to make clean energy accessible. And I'd say, just like Tristan said, right now we're operating in a rapidly changing federal landscape that's redefining how and how quickly these opportunities are accessible for folks. And I'd like to share with you the federal changes and what they mean for our partners in the sectors that we work in. Whoops. So there are two changes that I'd like to highlight. So as many of you probably know, the EPA's $7 billion Solar for All program was canceled earlier this year, which has had a real impact across the country. And in Massachusetts, about $156 million in awarded funds are now frozen. However, I am aware that right now there are plenty of environmental groups that are collaborating together and suing the EPA for this cancellation of funds. And so power to those folks and onward and forward, right? A lot of that funding was aimed at affordable housing in the affordable housing space. And so important that, yes, it's just so important that we're able to get those funds back in general. And so the second that I would like to highlight is the Inflation Reduction Act, which was passed in 2022 under the Biden administration, largest climate bill ever. And some of the highlights, right, of this IRA Act was direct pay, which allowed tax-exempt organizations to receive the solar credit as a cash payment. And then also the really big piece, right, the investment tax credit, ITC, which was the main federal incentive for solar projects. And it let organizations recover up to 30% of project costs and more through bonus credits, right? Through like maybe folks having projects in low income areas or energy transition communities. That long runway gave organizations time to plan and secure funding without, the fear of the incentive disappearing mid-project. And unfortunately, under the One Big Beautiful Bill, it has actually been rolled back, right? Causing solar tax credits to phase out earlier than planned. However, I will say that there is still time to act. Full credits are available for systems installed by December 31st, 2027. And then there is also a mechanism called Safe Harbor, which allows you to save the project and tax credits as long as you lock them in by July 4th, 2026. I do want to emphasize, of course, there is some urgency there for folks who are interested in this path, because once that window does close, it will not be guaranteed. So with all of these federal changes that are happening, Resident wanted to ensure that we could provide the right support during this time, and that's where our STAR program comes in. STAR connects affordable housing developers to resources and technical support to explore solar. Since we launched STAR in 2021, we've, delivered more than $400,000 in direct tenant credits, and projected about 62.7 million in avoided electricity costs. This has been like a great collaboration with Resident Energy, LISC, MACDC, and our other partners, as you can see here, helping make solar both financially and environmentally sustainable for affordable housing. For residents, of course, this means lower energy bills, visible investment into their community. For funders and agencies, this work has been a proven model to show how policy, financing, and technical expertise can align. And so now we're starting our STAR 6 phase, which is opening this month. And this time it's with a specific focus on responding to the federal shifts that we're seeing today. So helping folks navigate those timelines and requirements from the IRA, right? That's been rolled back, locking in those available tax credits and direct pay benefits. And of course, pairing right the federal and state programs to make sure that every dollar stretches. And honestly, the idea is really simple. We don't want anyone leaving federal money on the table since it is being taken away. So for the federal environment shifts, STAR 6.0 is our way of meeting, this moment. It's to support the past and current participants and identifying the key opportunities that they're interested in. And I'd say the next piece is that we're also, as we're committed to our multifamily and affordable housing leaders, we're also committed to our nonprofit leaders who would like to make clean energy part of their mission. And so our SUN program, Solar Upgrading Nonprofits, was launched earlier this year with the Providers Council and funded by Mass CEC. And it was created to explore solar and make it simple for folks, feel supported and achievable for nonprofits exploring this piece without the time and the technical capacity that makes it a little bit complicated. And so, so far we've done solar feasibility analyses for about 16 nonprofits, and we're already at seeing 83% of the program funding being committed. And so as we're thinking about this landscape that's changing, we need to adapt. So we're preparing to launch our second one, hopefully in the winter time. And this next phase is about helping the nonprofits move quickly to secure those federal subsidies. So similar to STAR, we want to expand the technical assistance piece, right? Guide folks on the, safe harbor deadlines, and make sure that folks feel supported. I think with all of these different situations, as we've been in these spaces, advocacy spaces, we want to be able to extend our arm in different ways to make sure folks feel supported. I will make sure to shift it over to Esmeralda now.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Joanna. Hello, everyone. It's so exciting to see so many familiar names in the audience and new ones as well. So thank you for being here. My name is Esmeralda Bisono. I'm the Community Engagement and Policy Manager in the Northeast region of Emerald Cities Collaborative. Emerald Cities Collaborative, or ECC, we're a national nonprofit organization founded in 2009, and we advance racial, economic, and climate justice to build communities that are more equitable, economically just, and sustainable. Our headquarters is in Washington, D.C., but we work out of 5 regional offices across the country to implement place-based strategies that advance policies and programming in community and worker power building, economic inclusion, and equitable clean energy implementation. Next slide. All right, so today I'm going to highlight the Emerald Connections program, and that's being led by my team at ECC and our partners, Latino Support Network and Action Inc. in Lynn, Massachusetts. So Emerald Connections is a community-driven pilot that integrates traditional energy efficiency weatherization services with health and safety upgrades. So we ensure that low-income residents, especially those in environmental justice communities and that face traditional barriers to weatherization, can live in energy efficient, comfortable, and healthy homes. The program is designed as a model for equitable building decarbonization. The pilot connects families to a coordinated suite of services, including energy audits, appliance upgrades, mold and asbestos remediation, and education on operating new equipment efficiently. The project also demonstrates how housing, energy, and service providers can collaborate to deliver deeper, people-centered retrofits. The goal of the pilot is to identify and systematically overcome pre-weatherization barriers that lead to traditional WAP deferrals. And overall, we want to serve 60 low-income households with comprehensive retrofits. Now, for funding, the pilot is funded through a U.S. Department of Energy or DOE grant. It's administered under the Weatherization Assistance Program, WAP, Enhancement and Innovation Fund. We also have funding from Mass CEC to expand our community engagement and client support efforts. All right, next slide. Great. Now I'll talk about some of the key impacts that programs like Emerald Connections have been experiencing this year due to shifts from the federal government. The first is administrative slowdowns at DOE. So widespread staffing cuts at the Department of Energy in early 2025 have led to slower turnaround times for communication to grantees and other administrative tasks. Programs like Emerald Connections, which rely on the DOE WAP oversight, have experienced program delays to implementation, administration, and providing key services to vulnerable residents. Reduced federal emphasis on climate and equity. The Trump administration revoked the Justice 40 initiative and disbanded the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, shifting federal priorities away from climate justice and community-driven models. So this change has weakened policy alignment for Emerald Connections and has created uncertainty about future funding eligibility for holistic retrofit work. And now the big one, I'm sure many of us have experiences of, or at least heard of, is grant terminations and funding cancellations. So just this past week, DOE announced the termination of 321 financial awards supporting 223 energy-related projects nationwide, and that cuts over $7.56 billion in awards. While WAP formula funds remain intact for the rest of this fiscal year, competitive or demonstration style grants like Emerald Connections face a higher risk of delay, deferral, or discontinuation during administrative reviews. Now, all of these higher level impacts create downstream impacts for the Lynn pilot, such as delayed reimbursements, scheduling delays for audits and installations, and staff and partners spending more time on administrative compliance, reducing time for community engagement and education, all of which we have experienced during this pilot. In summary, so even with all the changes happening at the federal level, like staffing cuts, slower turnaround times, shifting priorities, we are still moving forward. Emerald Connections was built to be community-driven and resilient, and that's what's carried us through. And our team has not stopped serving families or improving homes. We're just getting more creative. And yeah, that's it from me. Thank you, everyone. And if anyone wants to connect, talk more about the project, definitely happy to do that and can send out contact info. But I will now pass it to Tristan.
Thanks, Esmeralda. So hello again, everybody. Tristan Thomas. If you don't know about ACE, ACE is a 30-year plus old environmental justice nonprofit that has been doing great work on the ground throughout that entire time. In my role, I get to work on legislative and regulatory priorities, support things like our air quality campaign, support our uh, uh, comments and input around siting and permitting of clean energy infrastructure, um, get to support all the other great work that goes on at ACE, whether it's our youth organizing, whether it's our environmental justice assistance network, which provides pro bono technical, legal, and other assistance to communities facing challenges. And I'm just really proud to be part of this organization and proud to be here during this critical time. Next slide, please. So one of the ways that the federal landscape has impacted ACE's work is through the termination of a EPA grant, the Environmental Justice Thriving Communities Grant Making Program, which was set to distribute over $48 million throughout New England, EPA Region 1. ACE was proud to partner with Health Resources in Action, HRIA, and the New England Grassroots Environment Fund in forming Environmental Justice for New England, which successfully built a coalition which was able to secure a competitive grant for community-led grant making. We were going to be the grant makers helping to deliver funds to community-led projects. Um, Unfortunately, as I mentioned, it was terminated. But like Joanna mentioned around Solar for All and IRA, there are ongoing lawsuits. And we are optimistic that in the long run, we will ultimately receive these funds and that they will be delivered for meaningful projects. But we have to deal with the reality of where we are now, which is we don't have those funds and the money is not flowing. Next slide, please. So what this program would have gone towards are all of the important environmental justice priorities listed on the slide and more. So everything from air quality and asthma to disaster response and resiliency to job training, addressing clean water, lead, energy efficiency, pollution, community engagement, or all the issues that folks on the ground decided are urgent needs that need to be met through programming. The way that we operated this grant making process is we utilized a participatory grant making, which meant we recruited everyday people from the community. The eligibility requirements were very light and sparse. It was really, are you interested in environmental justice and are you willing to commit time to lend your brain to reviewing applications? Through our process, we evaluated over 379 applicants and ultimately decided to award 36 organizations to execute on air quality, water sampling, stormwater issues, and all these important tangible changes in programs and initiatives for communities. Uh, Despite losing the money, all of our work continues. And if there's a silver lining to this process, is that we built out a really robust, fantastic regional coalition. We have new and strengthened relationships with organizations from Rhode Island to Vermont to New Hampshire and within Massachusetts to synergize all the great work that we're already doing and to be more creative to move forward. We were doing this work before we applied for the grant, and we're doing it after. Um, ACE, for example, recently formulated a partnership with Boston Community Solar Cooperative to bring more community solar projects to neighborhoods like Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan. And we're continuing on our policy advocacy, we're continuing with our youth organizing, and these new relationships will enhance and support that work. And so, really grateful for everyone on the call spending time with us to hear a little bit about what each of our organizations is doing in the moment, but also excited to share information from a bigger picture perspective so that we can get out of sort of the depths of our work in our silos and make connections across sectors. And with that, I'll turn it back to Joanna to get us to our wonderful guest speakers you all have been waiting for. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Esmeralda and Tristan. I think, we're going to continue the work, and I'm happy that we're here to have folks to explain and to share, how we are doing this. So I'd like to introduce David Cash and Artie Griffin. David Cash. Here we go. Dr. David Cash is the former U.S. EPA New England Regional Administrator, a career public servant and policy leader. He blends science, community engagement, and cross-sector collaboration to advance climate action and environmental justice. He previously served as dean at UMass Boston and held senior roles in Massachusetts state government. He also holds a PhD from the Harvard Kennedy School. And Artie Griffin is a policy director at ECC, Emerald Cities Collaborative, a licensed attorney and former legislative director / committee executive director in Pennsylvania Senate. She advances equitable policy and provides technical assistance that makes federal, state, and local funding more accessible and accountable to low-income communities and communities of color. So yes, I'd like to introduce our guest speakers. Round of applause. And David, if you'd like to go first.
Great. Thank you, Joanna. And thanks to ACE and Resident Energy and Emerald Cities Collaborative for pulling this really important conversation together. And it's such an honor to be on this panel with all of you and with Artie. I'm just going to give a quick overview of kind of the perspective from the federal government, and then really looking forward to the Q&A. I kind of just want to step back because just for me, this last 20-something minutes of starting this has been incredibly inspiring and really bittersweet to hear the EPA programs that got out the door that were really moving forward, and to see what the current administration is doing to those programs, but way more importantly to the communities and people that have put so much time and energy into developing them, and then of course to the people who are going to benefit from all of the clean energy deployment that was going to be happening. So really bittersweet and also incredibly inspiring. I heard each of the three of you talk about your perseverance and resilience and how you're community driven. And regardless of what happens in Washington, that is not going to keep the movement at bay. There is just no question. We are moving with so much demand and with so much momentum, despite the cutbacks, despite the staffing shortages, despite the grants that have been stopped. Yeah, it's going to go slower and be more painful, but solar is going to get in tons of places. We're going to lower asthma rates. We're going to get electric vehicles. We're going to get public transit. We're going to all of those kinds of things. Again, slower than we would have wanted and expected, but this is moving forward. So I know we're going to come full circle around to like what can we do and everything. But you've heard what we can do by these first three speakers. Just remarkable. I always think about this work on a really personal level. I traveled all around New England, talked to people in communities who were so excited that there were going to be technologies coming to their neighborhoods so parents wouldn't have to drive their kids to the emergency room because of asthma attacks, or people who are really worried about their energy costs that were becoming a much larger and larger burden of their household budget, or people who are really excited about having jobs in their communities in this green energy revolution, folks who are going to be putting up solar panels or doing energy audits in homes, or being part of the offshore wind revolution. And that's really difficult to watch those things being taken away as well. But there were just so many dimensions of moving of what was called the Justice 40 initiative. Again, did not start with the Biden administration at all. All three of these groups have long histories and legacies, as do many other community groups, which is where the action is happening. I think one of the things that has been particularly difficult that we really tried to build up as a large federal agency, the Environmental Protection Agency, was building trust in communities. And there's really good reasons why there wasn't trust. I mean, who are the agencies that permitted manufacturing facilities and fossil fuel facilities, or allowed highways to cut through communities? This was the EPA and other federal agencies. And so we had a lot of work to do in the Justice 40 initiative to build back trust and to assist communities in a way that we could as a federal agency. And there were lots and lots of ways we did this, but Tristan mentioned one, which was the Thriving Communities Changemaker Grant Program, which is essentially saying, hey, create a network and you folks decide where the money is best spent, right? how can we as bureaucrats sitting in Boston or in Washington make those kind of choices? Those are, we don't understand what the priorities are, the interests are of communities, and that's precisely what the Thriving Communities Changemaker Grant Program was going to be doing. And with the optimism that Tristan brought to this, will be doing when the lawsuits are complete. But the other way was, there were a lot of folks in communities who are like, federal grants, oh my gosh, they're so complicated, they're unwieldy. How do we write them? How do we manage them? And so we had also developed, this was all through the Inflation Reduction Act. So it was not just EPA, it was Congress coming up with some really good ideas, partly by working with communities. But the Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Centers, some of you might have heard them called TIC-TACs, were designed, they were housed mostly throughout the country in public universities, but also created networks in which assistance was going to be given to communities that help them draft grants, apply for funding, all of that kind of stuff. And obviously that's been pulled back as well. But what I just want to end this part on, and again, this speaks to points that Johanna, Esmeralda, and Tristan made, was like prior to the Biden administration, networks were formed. During the Biden administration, there was a lot of funding to really support that development of networks. And I think that's what we see now. And those networks are still there. Yes, suffering under staff cuts and lack of funding. But if we can keep these moving so that when there is a time where funding is released and there's a new administration and more funding will come, I think the models of how to build out the clean energy future and result in a just transition where finally equity is centered in this development. I think we're on their way there, and this is a big bump in the road, no question, but it's just a bump in the road on our way there.
Thanks,
Thanks.
David. Go
Thank
ahead,
you.
Artie.
No, apologies, didn't mean to step in. I was just going to say thank you. I think David made a lot of incredible points there. And just again, want to thank y'all for having me here and the opportunity to speak to everyone, and to be a part of this panel, but to just hear some of the incredible progress that organizations are still making in spite of this moment. Um, I would say I kind of cut my teeth on policy in the state policy space. And working in state policy and then experiencing COVID and seeing how federal policy can deeply, deeply, deeply impact how policy is made at the state and local level. That just seems to have really resonated throughout the previous administration, and into this new administration. We have seen an immense shift in the way that the pendulum has swung, going from an administration that was very much about, embedding equity in their systems and righting past wrongs and building new systems of infrastructure that are going to empower communities as opposed to disinvest in them. And then, swinging back closer to the right, where we are now in another time and space of disinvestment and growing disparities. But I think one thing that I really take away from what we've already heard thus far today is just this incredible sense of hope that even though we have experienced or we are experiencing a lot of injustices and surrounded, I guess, just a lot of disheartenment, I would say. We are still moving forward. We are, making it work the best we can, and we're pivoting the best we can. And I think one point that David made about, there are already networks and coalitions working in this space prior to the Biden administration, but that ability to infuse capital and investment in those networks and infrastructures, I think cannot be understated, because now we are in a time of even though we are in a time of disinvestment, those structures have had an opportunity to build and thrive. And I think the best thing that we can do in this moment is to really fortify those structures that have been built, deepen the relationships that we've had. And even though we are in a time of, um, just seeing everything that has been happening, I think that one thing that we can't lose sight of is
the ability to envision what could come going forward. I think, now we are seeing the systems that are at the federal level are starting to crumble a little bit, but I think that we should think about, now that we have seen what worked with the Biden administration, we're seeing what doesn't work with the Trump administration. How can we use those lessons learned to build up a system that is truly embedded in equity and works for all community? So excited to see how that conversation evolves today and how we can push that visioning forward. Thanks, y'all.
Well, thanks so much to both of you for opening us up with your perspectives. We'll just jump right into some panel questions. And as a reminder, feel free to continue to drop questions in the chat, and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible. So first question, what policy changes and actions from the current administration and Congress concern you the most? Which of them are having the most direct and negative impacts on frontline communities?
Uh, David, you want to go first, or
Yeah,
I
no,
can?
go ahead, Artie.
Okay, so I would say, kind of as I was saying before, I think the impact that kind of a top-down mentality can have and how that can trickle down from the federal government to state and local governments. I think one of the biggest concerns that I have had is the way that this administration's some of the executive orders have really started to influence the way that people are thinking. While it's important to remember that executive orders only impact the federal government and the federal agencies, that doesn't stop them from having chilling effect on the way that people move, and especially when it comes to environmental justice and equity, given how those words are being used right now. You have executive orders that are literally saying that, diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and environmental justice is unlawful discrimination. You have the dismantling of environmental justice offices, defunding equity initiatives, not just defunding equity initiatives, but clawing back funding that has already been obligated to organizations to move this work forward. And while, again, that's happening at the federal level, you now have communities suffering from the lack of funding, but then also that chilling effect that's happening at the state and local government level and among funders too, of, all of a sudden this work is, discrimination. There's fear of lawsuits, more litigation. How is that going to impact their funding or their ability to engage? And so I think that is one of my biggest concerns is even though the federal government reach can only go so far, what is that saying to other power players in this space and how they are going to move and how it dictates their movements and then the subsequent impact that that has on community. So that's one of my biggest concerns right now.
Yeah, I would say that I absolutely share that, and Artie, you really framed that perfectly. It's so upsetting that if you kind of peel back partly what environmental justice is about, which is there are communities that have been overburdened and overburdened because of existing laws and existing actions of federal and state and municipal agencies. And we know that there are cumulative impacts. We know that, air pollution, water pollution intersects with one another, intersects with issues of income, it intersects with transportation issues, all of these kinds of things, which essentially the federal government is saying, oh, that doesn't exist. That's not a reality. And we know it's a reality whether you're having science tell you so, and more importantly, it's a reality because that's the lived experience of people in communities all over this country. And so for that chilling effect that Artie mentioned, which is happening in so many spaces, I mean, I just think about it, given my time that I've been in academia, of like the grants that have been cut, and most likely during this administration, it will be really hard for public health researchers to get funding to study this important thing. I mean, during my time at EPA, there hadn't been a lot of existing studies on cumulative impact. So although we thought it really important to try to figure out how to regulate or give funding. We didn't have a really great scientific basis to make the specific kinds of decisions, and we were starting to invest in that. And I know because I have colleagues who are in a variety of universities in the Boston area that their funding for cumulative impacts has been cut. So how are we going to understand, how a kid, who lives near a transportation corridor, who has asthma, who, wants to play outside on a hot summer day, who also has lead paint in their home, what the impact of that child is going to be on their education, on their development, et cetera, not to mention all the impacts on their family and their community who have to go to the emergency room and take time off of work. And, we know the cascading effects. And essentially what this administration is saying is that those cascading cumulative impacts don't happen. And we know that's not true. And so we're taking steps backwards when we should be leaping forward. So yeah, that's my biggest concern.
I think those are excellent observations, and for me, it highlights the increased importance of the role of the state and regional and municipal and local regulators and organizations and power players. We have an emerging framework for cumulative impacts here in Massachusetts, and it's really important that we all engage that ongoing open process, which is right now before the Department of Public Utilities and Executive EEA. And the chilling effect is unfortunate, and I think it should be a spark. We should be getting hot. We should have a fire underneath us to bring those things that we aren't getting at the federal level to the areas where we have more direct influence. Um, that connects me to a question we got from the audience, which is, what if funding doesn't start up again? What other roads can be taken to reach altered goals?
Can I jump in on that, Tristan? Because I want to build on what you just said about like the Public Utilities Commission, which there may be a lot of people in the audience who have no idea what that is because it's a very black box agency. They regulate the electricity and gas utilities, but with, you know, deep and complicated rules and very, very hard to follow. But so there are a couple of things. One is, and it relates to the other question here about funds going to the states. One is pushing for funding at the state level, right? There is a chance federal funding may come back to some degree even during this administration, the stuff that there was all the lawsuits on, and maybe in a future in an administration there'll be more funding, but let's assume there's none. These paths that Tristan was mentioning, how we regulate electric and gas utilities, how much, I mean, it does come back down to funding, but for example, what percentage of a electric utility, Eversource or National Grid, has to spend on low income housing, on weatherization for low income, or on solar being deployed on communities that haven't had access to funding in the past. There are regulatory rules that require such a thing. Massachusetts passed a law, I think 2 years ago, that cumulative impacts, that thing I mentioned before, has to be taken into account in air regulations. So there are opportunities for people as these regulations are developed or permits are given for communities to participate in that, to try to get the actions done that we need to get done in the private sector that not necessarily involved with funding, but can move the ball forward in terms of reducing pollution in those communities.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I was definitely going to that space as well. I think one thing about with the Justice 40 initiative and building equity requirements into grant making, it kind of pushed state and local governments to think, how can we make our systems more equitable? How can we make our programs more equitable? And so in that vein, I think a lot of state and local governments started to make some equity commitments within the way that they are implementing regulations, implementing their programs, developing their programs in the planning and development process. So really digging deep to see where those commitments were and if there's still a viable means of advocacy, and really latching on to those pieces and really pushing local leaders and state leaders to move that forward. I think the beauty of that is that they showed us that they are capable of, procedural equity, engaging communities in their decision making. It's possible. So really push them forward to continue to engage. and access those different leverage points to push for justice, particularly, even if it's not in the form of equity, it might be climate commitments. The priority climate action plans that state and local governments were building. Are there avenues there where you can access some equity in the way that they were building their climate commitments? Are they making commitments to consider environmental issues when they're regulating any of the utilities? So is that a piece that you can kind of latch on to? So even thinking outside of, like, it might not be specifically justice centered or equity minded, but how can we take the environmental, the climate, the economic opportunities out there and really latch on and embed some of the equity that we want to see in those spaces, and using those commitments as leverage points to better advocate for, or to advocate for what we want to see.
Yeah, thank you for those points. That sparked for me thinking about the role of the private sector as well. The private sector has their own set of leverage points and incentives, many of which we as communities are able to influence and help shape through policy. And I think we need to be more creative around the interplay between philanthropy, the private sector, community organizations, and government to address these complex problems. Um, it also makes me think of this next audience question, which is what advice would you give to individuals, especially those not working directly in clean energy, on how they can leverage their skills to support areas? Oh, I lost it. Uh, Sorry, I think oh, there it is. How they can leverage their skills to support areas where clean energy efforts have lost funding or momentum. I'll jump ahead of the guest speakers to provide my own answer, which is connect to community organizations and folks on this call. If you want to learn more about solar, you don't have to be an electrician or an engineer or know anything about energy. Resident Energy can provide education and materials in connection to resource. You can work with ACE and Boston Community Solar Cooperative if you want to help advise on how projects can be brought into a community, or if you want to get paid for helping to find sites. There are ways you can directly connect with organizations doing the work, no matter your background. And it's our responsibility as organizations to provide education, framing, and support for community-led projects and initiatives. And so that's the broad. The specific is I'll bring it back to cumulative impacts, which David has been mentioning. And there was a new law at the end of 2024 in Massachusetts where it sets out a new process for the siting and permitting of clean energy infrastructure. And right now, the state is working through its regulations on how cumulative impacts fits into that process. And so we're going to have this transition and all these new substations and transmission lines and infrastructure. Let's build them under a new, more just and equitable framework that incorporates cumulative impacts. And so if you want to learn more about how to add your voice to that, I mean, if you have no idea what that is, feel free to reach out to ACE and others on this call. But I'll turn it over to David and Artie if you have thoughts on that question as well.
I can jump in. I would just say that I think right now is a time for us to be really strengthening our community infrastructure in terms of, reinforcing our coalition networks, engaging with different community-based organizations to create, holistic community solutions, evaluating our assets that we have within each of the community-based organizations, our strengths, but then also understanding where our gaps, what knowledge holes do we need to fill? Do we need data collection? Do we need storytellers? Do we need communicators? Where can we kind of shore up our infrastructure so that when the tides turn, we are ready with full force to engage and continue the fight right now? So you might have some of those skills that are kind of a gap for those community-based organizations that they need. You might be a great grant writer, just a documenter, a legal mind. Like those are all skills that are needed in this moment. And so I love what Tristan said, connecting with your community-based organizations, understanding what the gaps are and where your skills might be an asset, and you can step in and help build the power within that organization.
Yeah,
Moving on to, sorry, go ahead, David. Don't mean to
I,
cut
well,
you off,
I had
please.
some thoughts, but I also wondered if Joanna or Esmeralda had anything to add, because I completely agree with Artie and Tristan. The action now needs to be happening at the community level, right? It's, and in that regard, I'm like the least knowledgeable here on this panel. And so I'd love to hear if Joanna and Esmeralda. And then I had one other thought that's a kind of high level that I've always loved that I want to share.
Yeah, thank you, David. I did have a lot of thoughts while you all were speaking. And just thinking about my experience in art projects, a lot of the time these are community-driven, community-led projects, and we really look for opportunities to connect with people that are not in this space, that are just living their life day to day, who could see benefit in our programs, like the program Weatherization and Healthy Homes earlier that I spoke about, and also extreme heat pilots and things like that. So. We like to go to different groups, groups that already meet, and talk to them about what this is. But if there are community members who just want to learn more, who have a group, it could be a book club or a cooking club or anything like that, and they want to learn more about certain projects, like definitely reach out. And a lot of the time, we're very happy to talk to you all.
And yeah, I will add that in thinking about this, a lot of the conversations that I have, of course, is where are the gaps that are happening? Where is capacity limited? So, we do have some folks that will be speaking, like Hassan, from the Boston Climate Action Network, right? We have folks
Yeah.
coming in from a foundation. So those are like really great places also to start. Like, are there foundations that are, thinking about climate one step ahead, and how can you be a part of that? Can you help with grant writing, or like, I don't know, giving them ideas, right? Or if there's something that's related to the workforce, right? I think there's a really big piece on the workforce and how we were thinking how these dollars were going to also stimulate our workforce. So if you're, in that area, I believe that everyone definitely has a skill to be able to help with this. And as Artie said, definitely deepening, our relationships, figuring out what's happening in town, in your town, and going to those meetings. I think is just like one way. You don't necessarily have to say anything, just be a fly on the wall, be an observer, and see, how you can strategically be involved in this investment, whether it's in, your tight-knit community. But also it's very much like the folks that are in your immediate circle, educating them on what's actually happening. I speak solar all the time, but I
Mhm.
also speak like, community partnerships and what's happening. So I'm constantly, all my family members always know what's going on. I shared, this event through all of my channels just to tell people there are shifts happening. Wouldn't you want to know how this may be affecting you, right? And also affecting maybe your friends that are in this space. So just tuning into a webinar like this and sharing this information can go a long way just because folks don't know actually what's happening. And it's up to us, I think, to be able to share this knowledge. I think this is a really great opportunity. So I'd say definitely tune in to the rest of the sessions because I think folks will speak about the coalitions and how you can be a part of that. And we wanted to make sure to include that because folks are like, okay, all this is happening. Now, what can I actually do? Well, we have great speakers that will be able to tell you what you can do with this knowledge that we're sharing with you. But yeah, that's, I think, some of the things that I think about when folks are kind of, feeling stuck. Just get out there, get on some newsletters, and take it easy because climate anxiety is real. I saw that that was also a question in there too. So take it easy on yourself and definitely find the community that will support you through this time as well. I think we've, even in this space here, have found community in talking about what's happening and how we can help each other through
Yeah.
this. Yeah. And uplift each other, most importantly.
Yeah. One of the things one of my heroes in this space is Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson. She's a marine biologist who's just talks about climate in just ways that are powerful and beautiful and everything. And I think I can share, but she talks about like how to get engaged in this space in the following way. Let me know if this works. Does that work? Okay. So she's like, what brings you joy? What brings you satisfaction, delight? I love thinking about taking on these things with delight as you're even in the midst of the crazy, and what you're good at a couple of y'all who just spoke are like, what are your skills? What do you bring? Are you a good communicator? Are you a good organizer? Are you a good analyst? Are there's a million things that need to get done. And then what is that needs to get done? What are the solutions? And your sweet spot is right in the middle there. If you can get all three of those lined up in some kind of way, then lean into that. And whether that's short term, what has to be done in your community group, or long term, looking for a career, um, I think this is it. For me, this has been a kind of helpful way to think about how to approach something that seems really overwhelming, and maybe you don't have the right skills, but you do. If you're here, if you're interested, I'm sure you have something to bring to the table.
David, do you mind repeating the name of the doctor you just
Yes,
referenced?
Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson. I'll drop her if I can do this. I'll drop her. She has a website. I'll drop it in the chat. Or is that the right way to do it? To drop it in the chat?
Yeah, you should be able to
Okay,
type
great.
answer in response to the question, and everybody
Oh,
can see
perfect.
the link.
Okay, I'll
Yep.
do that.
Um, Related to a question in the chat, are there any silver linings or opportunities for progress in the energy space? Where else is there momentum worth noting? And I think that connects to just broadly in the administration, are there any opportunities for bipartisan collaboration or alignment? Take those questions how you will.
I will say, like, after sitting with this question, I think there are potential opportunities to find some unlikely allies here. I think right now a lot of people are hurting, whether that's, the loss of job opportunity through the funding, the grants that have been terminated, increased energy bills because of the lack of access to renewable energy opportunities. I think that presents opportunity to maybe connect with folks that we might not have been thinking about before. Perhaps if your organization was not necessarily building relationships with labor, this could be an opportunity to engage with them more. This could be an opportunity to um, look at some of those communities that also missed out on opportunities with projects. I guess I think the kind of one of the themes that I'm ascertaining from this whole conversation is the need to deepen our relationships and build our networks. And I think that this is potentially an opportunity to look at who else is maybe seeing setbacks that maybe normally weren't experiencing those setbacks. How can we now use this as a common ground to kind of bridge those gaps and um, uh, build some coalition?
I think there might be, oddly or not, there might be some interesting areas. And again, already you've referred to things like this as well, the economics, et cetera. Somewhat surprisingly, as like solar for all was challenged and offshore wind, so these big electricity generating kind of technologies, lots of people from many different political stripes were like, wait, this is going to be a major cost problem. And framing it in that way, or a major job, this is going to hit jobs in a pretty bad way. So, kind of jumping on those kinds of things where framing it around costs or reliability or job growth I think is always a smart thing to do. And I also think the health questions too, right? By the way, all of these investments in the communities we're talking about have the biggest bang for the buck than anywhere, right? When we reduce costs in communities where people have high bills, that's going to have a big impact. If we reduce asthma in communities where there are high rates of asthma, that's going to have big cost savings and benefits and all these kinds of things. So framing it in that kind of way, I think, can be helpful and get new allies.
Related to that, and thinking about how we can stop playing defense and maybe go on offense, are there proactive kinds of projects, initiatives, policies that we should be pursuing as a community fighting for environmental justice? How do we go on offense?
I mean, in short, I would take the playbook from, let's see, Resident Energy, ACE, and Emerald Cities Collaborative. It's kind of, you know, I think there's so much about what y'all are doing, which is on offense. There isn't like when I look at your materials and hear y'all speak, it's not like, oh, woe is us, we have these big problems. It's much more like we're moving forward. We have lots to do. We have people to save. We have, the environment to save. We have jobs to grow, boom, boom, boom. And yeah, it's more difficult to be on offense because you've been hamstrung, but that's not the framing. So I think you've got the expertise there on going big, going long, you know.
Yeah, definitely an opportunity, I think, to build the movement. I think this is an opportunity where people might be very much more receptive to that message around a just transition, and how can we be moving that messaging forward and getting more people involved and on board with. Now that we, really see how the dynamic of an extractive economy and how that is impacting people deeply on a personal level, and what it could mean to move to a more regenerative society where we're, honoring people's work and their life and their livelihoods. This is truly an opportunity to build a bigger movement, and engage people who maybe has historically been on the outskirts, but really pull them in, and everything forward.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think it's really about collaboration when we think about offense, right? I think when Resonance started in 2016, our beginning campaigns were with houses of worship from folks in the city, right? In Dorchester, Codman Square, saying like, what is important to you about climate and how can we make this happen, right? How can we mend the two together? So I really think about just having an open conversation, being willing to hear what folks are actually saying also, not really just saying like, oh yeah, I'm here, but actually making yourself present in that conversation, putting your speaking ears on and just coming from a place of something that comes up may be a little off, but I'm here to listen and learn and figure out how we can strategize to make this work. Some of the work that I do outside of Resonant includes the Coalition for Climate Inclusion, CORE Climate Inclusion. And so, that's one way that we've been paving, a critical path towards the inclusion of COREs and the future of green jobs in the Commonwealth, right? And we want folks to be a part of this conversation. So that's one way that we've been having, meetings with folks from the communities and helping try to push this forward. And then I think like some initiatives, there was a question that was asked around like what's happening maybe in Massachusetts, that's a silver lining. We have a really great SMART program, right? A SMART 3 program is rolling out, which essentially is the Solar Massachusetts Renewable Target, which allows folks to really capitalize on the incentives within Massachusetts. We have a strong network also in Massachusetts that's pushing this forward. We just have to be a part of that conversation, go to those briefings, and see where we can really give our advocacy in different rooms. A lot of this is about, I think, like where we may be in certain rooms where maybe those folks aren't able to speak, right? And so how can we bring that into that room and voice our opinion for others, right, that haven't been a part of that conversation before? So I think that's kind of how I work, or I think of how Resonant has worked on the offense instead of defense. But if they need us to be defensive, we can be. If they need us to be offensive, we can, because I think that's the line of work that we're in right now. But it's obviously better to collaborate and figure out synergies with one another to make this movement. I believe we're making history right now. So let's continue this.
Yeah, I'll just add to that quickly. I appreciate everything you all are saying and definitely agree with it. One thing that was on my mind as you all were speaking was that saying there's no such thing as bad publicity. So I'm hopeful that the more attacks on climate, racial justice, all these things that are happening, the more it's going to be top of mind for people and the more they're going to want to get involved in this, which I think is just going to help the movement. Um, so I'm hopeful for that.
We have Up to about 10 more minutes for open discussion. We may not need all of it, but just want to flag that for folks in the audience. If you had any burning questions or things that weren't addressed, feel free to elevate it in the Q&A function and we'll try to get to it. But the last question I'll ask is, might you be able to share any perspective on the current government shutdown? How might those dynamics affect our work in the landscape?
I'll just, I think, say quickly, I think the one thing about this just like slow burn or just huge burn that happened with the shift in the administration, was I think that we're already working in a space where we didn't really have the support of a federal government. So the idea that this is now kind of shut down, it's, what does this really change for us? We've already been pivoting to a state and local ground game to do a deeper engagement with our local leaders or state leaders, trying to understand what opportunities there could be there. So I think if anything, this just further emphasizes that even if a better federal government comes back online within the next administration, we still need to focus on what's happening at our local and state level because those are the folks that have uh, incredibly direct impact on our lives, and that is a space where we can be more active and involved in and try to move the needle. So I guess I would just say I don't know that it has had an impact, but others might have a different perspective.
Yeah, definitely plus one on that one. You just reminded me, Artie, how I was in Massachusetts state government both when George W. Bush was president and when Obama was president. Obviously, there was a difference, significant difference on one level. On another level, it's like we were going faster than both of those administrations anyway, right? And as a state, as a number of states were. And so, um, maybe what we're seeing now with all of the concern is just we got to double down on that, double down on the relationships, double down on pushing our states and our cities to move faster and harder and all of those kinds of things. So, again, kind of like I think someone mentioned silver lining. Silver lining is, oh, this has shown even more than ever, like how important it is those city and state relationships are.
Thank you. Um, Question from the chat. Are some of the funds for energy initiatives that were withheld going back to states to spend? I heard that may be the case for transportation funds. So curious if you all are aware of any federal programs that either are restarting and sending funds or that survived cuts and are still critically important that folks can take advantage of. Um, what funds might be flowing from the federal level to the state at this moment?
I think one program that in the transportation sector that is back online is the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. So, kind of bridging transportation and energy in terms of building out our electric vehicle charging infrastructure across states. Um, so that's great that the funding is back in state coffers. I will say that given this administration, all of the wonderful, wonderful, wonderful language around equity and ensuring engagement with underserved and overburdened communities and like making sure that there was a true voice of the community in its implementation. All of that beautiful language has been stripped from program guidance. So that is no longer there. However, I think uh, you know, because that was there in the previous administration, and this is still an ongoing program, um, even though that requirement in the program guidance is not there, the commitments should still be there, in which the states were putting in their implementation plans. So I think hopefully, even though that there's not that requirement, there's still some idea of at least the framework for engagement. It might still be there, and that could be an opportunity to engage with your state Department of Transportation energy folks. So that is one funding source I would say is back on. But I think in terms of transportation, that's the one that's top of mind.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of different kinds of grants. So the ones that Tristan and I mentioned at the beginning, the community grants, which weren't going through a state anyway, if those are swept, and they're not going to go to anywhere. Well, Yeah. But things like solar for all, those were going directly to states. And then the states were creating the infrastructure to get them to the communities. And those were all, by the way, that was $7 billion, all designed to go to communities in need and vulnerable communities and disadvantaged communities. So those will go back through the states if they win the lawsuits. And there are a whole host of ones that are like that, where the states were the proponents. And there's also a whole bunch of kinds of grants that regularly just went as block grants to states. So like clean water and drinking water grants went directly to states. Some of those are held up as well. So the ones that were designed to go to states, if the lawsuits prevail, they'll go back to the states. But the ones that were not going to go to states will not, I don't think, will end up back in the states.
Appreciate those insights. I think we're down to our last two questions, if that's okay with everyone. This one is for all the folks, including Joanna Esmeralda. Are there any projects or topic areas that any of your orgs are particularly interested in or are open to receiving support slash partnership right now? I'll quickly answer. ACE, our perspective is thinking about energy, technology, and finance and all the ways that those domains impact, extract, support, interact with our communities, and how can we build tables and space for community participation, decision making, and changing outcomes. So anything within those domains, thinking about energy efficiency and clean energy to the intersection of environmental justice and economic development to air quality, public health, and environmental impacts. We're open to all of that and are doing great work on it. Check out our website and policy agenda.
Awesome, thank you. I can go next. Yeah, so for Emerald Cities, we're very focused on workforce and contractor development work. We do have a contractor academy working with minority and women-owned businesses. And there's a lot more info on that on our website. But we also do policy engagement and advocacy and community programming. So focused on climate resilience and equitable building decarbonization, making sure that vulnerable communities are getting access to the benefits of the clean energy transition. So I would say those are definitely our focus. In terms of climate resilience, we're working on extreme heat resilience in Lynn right now. But we're definitely always open to conversations and seeing where potential collaboration and partnerships can go.
Yeah, and I'll speak for resident. We definitely are open to partnership. A lot of the work that I do is partnering with different nonprofits to see how we can, educate folks and within communities or nonprofits themselves. So if there are, folks, as I had mentioned, the SUN program, if that's something that's of interest, we definitely would love partnership in that realm. But also our STAR program as well when it comes to the affordable housing space. If there are folks that you're aware of that are interested in that, we do welcome a conversation about anything. I would say everyone within Resident are thought partners, internal and external. So in that case, if there are any, opportunities that you think are also of interest that you could bring over to us. Of course, we are in the clean energy space, so we do a lot of advocacy work as well. So if that's something that there is partnership in that area, we're definitely open to. So I'd say all realms. We welcome a conversation and would just get things started and see kind of where that lands. So yeah.
David, Artie, any partnership, collaboration opportunities or interests you want to flag for the audience? No pressure, just want to check.
I mean, I want to build on what I already said before, which is like, yeah, obviously lots with other community groups, but state and municipal partners at this time also really important because those will have a touch with government in a way that can either be helpful directly or can help block things that might be harmful. So.
Yep, David, you covered it. That's what I was going to say is never underestimate your allies in local and state government. especially the career folks within the agencies. Those guys are incredibly knowledgeable, uh, and really can be really supportive.
Final quick question to close us out. For many of us, and we touched on it earlier, for many of us, the federal shifts have created a renewed sense of climate anxiety. How are you within your own work, teams, or communities managing those feelings and staying motivated to keep pushing forward? Um, I'll jump ahead of everyone and give my own answer again, which is this isn't new. Black and brown low-income communities have been on the front lines for as long as we've been in this country. I'm from the Bronx, where highways run all through my neighborhood, and everyone in my family grew up with asthma, and that was well before the Trump administration. So there's always been a sense of urgency and commitment. And to Esmeralda's point, this is a wake-up call. This is a spark. This is a top of mind. Bring it to attention so that we can build allies and coalitions. And so, what keeps me grounded is remembering that in certain parts of Roxbury, the life expectancy is only 68 years old, compared to 91 two train stops away in Back Bay. And so no matter how I'm feeling underwater, overwhelmed, I have a responsibility given the privileges that I've had to be in this position. And that's the energy that keeps me going in my work.
Yeah, I'll just add quickly, on a personal level, do what gives you joy and make sure that you're grounding yourself, and being around people who care about you, who you care about, and, grounding yourself. This is a lot of heavy work. I know a lot of us daily, this is, what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. But yeah, I think collaboration, being around people, yeah, just stay grounded and take care of yourself.
Yeah, and I'd say within the resident team, we definitely leave a lot of space for speaking about the changes that are happening, whether it's at our lunch table, whether it's in a one-on-one, or whether it's just on a walk. So being able to calm when things are released is something that we have put into practice. And also, our managers have very much informed us, like, try to figure out things to keep you grounded and take care of yourself and find community within resident, but also on the outskirts, right? And so personally, I like to think of how my ancestors have combated a lot of the vitriol that is happening, but also like how they made sure that they carried throughout it. So different techniques, meditation. I am a I meditate, yoga personally, and calling from my previous folks. So I think that's just one way that I've used that, and also within the resident space to help us center ourselves and continue to push this work forward.
I knew folks were going to say community, surround yourself in community, participate in things like this. I wasn't anticipating somebody would say meditation, but yes, Joanna, me too. I've been meditating regularly for the last 5 or 6 years, and it's made such a big difference in preparing. I didn't know it was going to prepare me for this kind of time, but it does. So thank you for that.
I'll just add rest. It's so important, and this work can burn you out real quick. So get your rest.
Well, we're at time, and I got to turn it over to Esmeralda to just close this out and plug our upcoming 2 webinars where we'll shift from understanding the landscape to more opportunities on how community organizations are reacting, responding, and how you can tap in. We'll just take a moment to do virtual round of applause for our wonderful guest speakers and thank them so much for their time and their insights, and for all of you for staying on for so long. And with that, I'll turn it over to Esmeralda to close us out.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you everyone again for joining us. This is a series, so we have 2 other webinars coming up. The next will have a spotlight on community resilience. So there will be examples from other organizations in Massachusetts and how some of these shifts are impacting them and how they are responding to that. There will also be Essex County Community Foundation here talking from the perspective of a foundation who has a fund that funds these creative responses and emergency responses. So it will be good to hear that perspective. So that will be on October 20th, 12 p.m. And then the third will be, you know, what now? What do we do? How can we all work together? And we're going to have great speakers for that webinar. But you will get an email with more information, send the website out to you. But yeah, I want to say again, thank you to you all, and thank you to David and Artie, and of course, Tristan and Joanna.